I'm going to list 5 different events that are recorded in the Bible. And I want you to think about what these events have in common. I'm going to give you 5 of them. The first one is God brings all the living creatures to Adam so he can name them. So right in Genesis, God brings all the living creatures to Adam. Talk about a big task. Wouldn't that be an amazing task to do? Number 2, by the command of God, the Israelite armies march around Jericho 13 times. One time for the first 6 days, and on the 7th day, they march around 7 times before they invade the city. That's the second event. The third event is God whittles down Gideon's army from about 32,000 down to 300 before they attack the Midianites with basically empty jars and torches. That's what they use for weapons. Number 4, Elisha tells Naaman, and that was the reading that we had this morning, the commander of King Aram's army, a Gentile army, to wash himself 7 times in the Jordan River, and if he wants to be healed from his leprosy. That was event number 4. And the 5th event, at Mount Carmel, in his confrontation with the prophets of Baal and Asherah, the false gods, Elijah has the people pour 4 large jars of water over the altar 3 consecutive times. Not just once, but 1, 2, 3 times, 4 jars. So count, do your math. That's 12 times. And thoroughly soaking the intended sacrifice, he then calls on the name of the Lord. Those are my 5 events that have stuck in my mind that I want to share with you this morning. Now I ask you, what do these 5 events all have in common? And there could be more than one answer to this. But you know me too well. You know that there's one particular answer that I'm looking for, and I'll tell you what it is right now. And that is, each of these events were completely impractical. There's a sense of impracticability about them. And if I were to try to do them myself, chances are I would never attempt to do them like they were described in the Bible. I would go about it a whole different way. That's the way I think. For example, don't you think it would have been much easier and perhaps even more logical if God would have named all the living creatures and then told Adam the names of the creatures? Wouldn't that avoided a lot of muss and fuss and craziness? I'm not saying there was a lot of craziness going on there, but I can't imagine the animals all just, maybe because it was before the fall, they're all tame and everything. But now I know what you were thinking. And it probably goes something like this. Well, Pastor, there's actually a good reason why God paraded the living creatures in front of Adam so that he could name them. And Pastor, since you're not enlightened right now, I'm going to tell you why. What I think is going on there. God wanted to teach Adam that he truly was given dominion over the earth. And the exercise of naming the animals symbolizes or reflects this God-given responsibility. Yeah, that's what you would tell me, right? You would tell me that. See, you guys are good Bible scholars. You know this stuff. Second, seeing all those animals up close that Adam had a chance to do when they were paraded by him, he would realize right away that there was no suitable companion for him. In other words, the animal parade would go by and he'd realize, where's the woman? Where's my companion? And he would become keenly aware of his need for a complementary partner. So the point I'm trying to make here is that I'm not trying to argue against God's logic. There's always a good reason God does the things he does, though we may not understand the reasons. And what I'm trying to get at is that God doesn't always operate in the most practical way. He doesn't. At least from my perspective, at least from our perspective, or should I say the world's perspective, because guess what? Whether we want to admit it or not, a lot of times we think and operate from the world's perspective. We do. a worldly perspective rather than from God's. I hate to burst the bubble, but it's true. Take, for example, Naaman's response after he receives the news from Elisha's messenger. Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times. What is Naaman's response to that? The Bible says he went away angry. I thought for sure this prophet would come out and wave his hand over the infected area of my body and cure me of my leprosy. Are not these other rivers in Damascus, aren't they better than the waters of Israel? Couldn't I go and wash in them and be cleansed? So what did he do? He turned away in rage. Turned away in rage. God told him, here's what you have to do to get, and I'm not going to do that. That's stupid. It's impractical. You see, Naaman was looking for a very practical solution to his problem. And he was willing to pay good money for it, wasn't he? It says 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold. Wow. 10 sets of clothing. Hey, and hopefully, if he did that, his problem would disappear. He had a very serious problem, didn't he? Now, to many of us, what Naaman was prepared to pay would be a lifetime of wealth, probably. I don't know what 6,000 shekels of gold looks like, but it sounds like a pretty good amount of money. But maybe to the king's general, that wasn't much. But it was the price he was willing to pay to have his health restored. And I guess he figured that since he was willing to pay that much, he should expect a certain level of care that should come with that. So along with his pay, he had certain expectations. Don't we always have expectations? Sure we do. Especially when you pay money for it. Now, it doesn't say the transaction happened yet, but he was willing to pay that, right? He envisioned that the prophet would come out and come out of his house. He would wave his hand over the disease area, and he would call upon his God to perform the healing. This is the expectations of Naaman. In a very real sense, Naaman viewed this interaction with Elisha a purely transactional relationship, right? He had a need. He was willing to pay for that need. And don't we operate in the same manner, typically? I have a need. I have a broken down car. I need to go to the auto shop and have it fixed. I'm willing to pay money for that. And you expect when you do that your car will be fixed. See, Elisha had connections, didn't he? He knew someone who could get the job done. Don't you like it when something happens in your house, you know someone who can get the job done? Where's Daryl? Daryl's not here. When I have something go in my head, Daryl, I call Daryl. He's downstairs, yes. But he can get the job done. Maybe it's a broken pipe. Maybe the batteries went out on my remote control. I don't know, but whatever. Daryl's there to help me. But let's be practical about things. Get the job done. That's how we operate. He was, after all, the general of an army. And one doesn't rise to this position of power without being practical and pragmatic. But we quickly learn that practicality, his desire for practicality, will not get the job done here. He wants to be practical. Stay there by the rivers that are closest to him. Those waters are better anyway. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, folks. Our desire for and our tendency toward practicality. By the way, did you know that there is also a word called, and I'm probably going to butcher this word. Okay, there's practicability. Did you know it's a word? Practicability is in the dictionary. As you notice, it is almost like the word practicality. So I guess we could say that practicability and practicality are practically the same. How about that? All right. I got a groaner out of it. Thanks. Appreciate that. But joking aside, I think our practicality can actually have adverse effect on us as we try to discern the will of God. I really mean this. It can actually have a paralyzing effect on us, which would cause us to miss out what God really wants us to do. Because we think to ourselves, it's unpractical. Is God telling me? That's impractical. I'm not going to do that. For example, do you think marching around Jericho 13 times is a good invasion strategy or tactic? Let's think about this for a second. First, in marching around the city, you are exposing yourself to the enemy, who is probably on the top of the wall, shooting arrows and other numerous projectiles at you from above. So you're very vulnerable, flaming arrows and other such thing. You're also giving away to your enemy the opportunity to assess your numbers and the resources you have, and not to mention the position, your position. All these things go against the field manual for generals who are trying to conquer different places. Excuse me, I didn't mean to. Anyway. What God called the Israelite army to do would certainly not be advised in any field manual for the military generals, and yet the Israelites obeyed God's unorthodox instructions, and they gained the victory. It's one of the most famous stories in the Bible, isn't it? Yes, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. Do they always say fit? Is it always fit, Llewellyn? A fit? I mean, is that an old term, Old English for fought? Is it a dialect? Okay, gotcha. I always like to call on my resident theologians. It's always fun. I got them different places in the church, so it's great. If I want to go to the Baptist, I go here. If I want to go Methodist, I go. If I want to go Anglican, over there. Anglican, over there, okay? Dallas Theological Seminary, back there. I love it. What resources we have. But would the Israelites have taken Jericho if they had done a more practical approach? Who knows? I don't know. Probably not if it was against God's instruction. Probably not. And what about Gideon's experience described in the book of Judges? Gideon's army and his allies were able to push the Midianites back across the Jordan. But they didn't accomplish this with a victory with 32,000 people or 32,000 men or 10,000 men, with only 300 men. See, God whittled them down to 300 men and said, now you can go and chase them back across the Jordan. That's impractical. Doesn't one of the Proverbs say that a wise king will assess his chance of victory before he heads out to the battle? He's going to take an inventory. He's going to say, okay, how many do they got on their side? How many do we get on our side? Well, if we meet in the field of battle, we might lose because they got more than we do. That's the way we think. That's using logic. That's using human reasoning. But Gideon did defeat the Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the other eastern people, this is what the Bible says, who settled in the valley, thick as locusts, it says, whose camels could be no more counted than the sands on the seashore. So hopefully they hopped on their camels and took off across the Jordan. Who in their right mind would do such a thing? I know I wouldn't. I wouldn't because I'd say it's too impractical. That would be the understatement of the year. Taken from a human perspective, that almost looks like a suicide mission. The point I'm trying to make in all this is that we sometimes use the honorable trait of practicality, or practicability, however you want to say it, to justify. You say, I'm going to be practical, and so we justify our inaction for the Lord. It's not practical. Does this all making sense to anybody here? I hope. I refer back to the message about investment. Remember a couple Sundays ago, we talked about, maybe it was 3 Sundays ago, talked about investment, communicating the idea that God wants us to invest in the church. And Jesus prayed, may it be done on earth as it is in heaven. But maybe investment isn't the best word to use, because in our mind, when we think about investment, we think about the return on the investment. This is a very practical way of thinking. We want to see a tangible return on our investment. And if we can't see that return, guess what? We're quick to write it off as it's unfeasible, it's impractical, and it's not worthy of our time nor our resources. So I'm telling you today is that God will eventually call us to do something impractical. In other words, the plan God calls you to won't necessarily look that good on paper. You may not see the tangible and desired outcomes that you're hoping for anytime soon, but still, God has a reason for it. And we just don't want to write it off and say, well, that's impractical, God, so I ain't going to do it. Pardon me for saying ain't. I didn't mean to do that, but... And the question I need to ask myself, and maybe I need to ask you too, what is more important? Is looking and being practical in the eyes of the world, is that more important than stepping out in faith to do God's will that God is calling you to do, even if it doesn't make a lot of sense? I think that's what happens. That's that paralyzing part. I'm not going to do that, God, because, and what my way of thinking, it's impractical. And my neighbors will probably think it's impractical. And they might laugh and scoff and think, boy, that's very impractical. That's craziness. You see, I think we often choose practicality over the still small voice of God, because in practicality, it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's stressful. And it may cause us to exercise our faith. And if we haven't been exercising our faith very much, well, that only causes more anxiety when we start exercising our faith, because I'm not used to doing that. Sometimes it feels much easier to trust ourselves, to trust in ourselves and in our own wisdom, than it is to trust in God and what He might be calling us to do. I suppose this is why so many people who were initially following the Lord Jesus fell away from Him after He shared with them the difficult truth that said, hey, if you want to follow me, guess what? You're going to have to take up your cross and follow me daily. And when they heard that stuff, I'm not going to do that. So yes, the point I'm trying to make here is God is going to call each of us to do some crazy stuff that seems, at least to the world, and maybe to us, to be impractical. He told the rich young ruler to give away all his possessions and follow Him, didn't He? Very impractical. Why couldn't Jesus have said to him, hey, take all your money, put it into a trust fund, and set up a trust fund for your children. They'll be all taken care of in the future, and then you can go and follow me. That would have been the practical thing to do. Why did certain people in the early church sell parcels of their own land and then distribute the money to those in need? Impractical. They could have built some new church buildings with that money. There was nice space for it. They had the land. That's the most expensive part sometimes. My question today is, could this church ever be impractical without losing their minds? Is that possible? I'm not sure it is. Practicality is ingrained in us. That's why we go to Dollar General and we wait for the Raisin Bran to go on sale so I can get 3 boxes for the price of 1. We love our practicableness. As a matter of fact, we probably love it too much. But we're going to find out. I have an idea that we're going to implement for the next 35 days. I've even given a name. I love names. I love acronyms. Here's my name. Here's the name of this. It's called Scrolls. Spelled S-C-R-O-L-L, scroll, and then with the number 7 at the end, with a little line down there to make it look like a Z, okay? I took the 7 and a little line to make a Z, okay? It stands for Scriptures Read Out Loud, Live on the Sevens. Scriptures read out loud. Here's how it's going to work. Oh, by the way, I need to make a little message here, a little thing. This was not, you cannot go and blame the deacons for this, nor the trustees, or anybody on the council, the member of the councils. This is strictly my idea. You can't even blame my wife, okay? This is my idea. Well, I believe God had some input into giving me this idea. So for the next 35 days, that's beginning tonight and goes till Saturday, April 4th, which is the day before Easter Sunday, at 7 o'clock a.m. and at 7 o'clock p.m., the Holy Scriptures will be read out loud in the sanctuary from the pulpit, from a Bible, not a smartphone. So from the actual Bible. You cannot look it up on your smartphone and do it that way. The first reading will be from the Old Testament, and it will last 10 minutes. We will begin with the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible. So I'll read for 10 minutes out of the book of Genesis. After 10 minutes, we will take a 5-minute break. 5-minute break. After that 5-minute break, then there will be a reading out of the New Testament beginning in the book of Matthew for 10 minutes. So that makes sense? So it's 2 10-minute slots with a 5-minute intermission. Okay? On a sheet of paper that will be up here somewhere, the reader will record the Bible verse which will be the starting point for the next reader. So for example, well, I'll just explain. Okay, for example, if the Old Testament reader completes his reading, let's say Genesis chapter 2, verse 23, then the next Old Testament reader will start at Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. And that will be written down on a page. Start here. Start at this verse. Okay? That will be true with the New Testament as well. So you start, let's say you read for 10 minutes, you get to Matthew chapter whatever, 3 verse something. Write down where the next reader will start. Now the question, I'm sure you have questions. Well, here's one. Who will be the readers? Well, it all depends on who shows up. If no one shows up, then guess what? No one reads. If no one's here to read, then the Bible isn't read. If you show up and you are the only one here, then guess what? You become the reader. But you still must read aloud from the pulpit, from the sanctuary. So you cannot just sit in the pew and read it silently. It must be read out loud from up here, okay? Always read the Old Testament first. Always take a 5-minute break between the Old and the New Testament. If after reading the Old Testament you are still the only one here present, guess what? You get to be the reader of the New Testament. If someone shows up and they want to read, let them read the second reading if they want to. So let's say you're reading, someone else shows up, guess what? They can be the second reader if they want to. Maybe they don't want to be. Maybe they want to just listen. Then guess what? You get to read some more. Always record the starting verse for the next reader. So you stop in the Old Testament. This is the verse I stopped. Write down the verse they should start. Old Testament and New Testament. Maybe I'll have two. Have an old and a new. You can read from any version of the Bible you like. You want to read from the NIV? You want to read from the NAS? You want to read from the Message? You want to read from the Old King James? Doesn't matter, as long as it's not the Book of Mormon or something like that, okay? Read from, an accepted version of the Bible. The microphone will not be on. The heat probably will not be on. There will be no music. There will be no official prayer or benediction. There will be no offering. There will be no nursery service. Snacks will not be available. Nobody needs to record their name about who read. That's not important. Don't write your name, who read. All you have to do is, and you don't have to put a date either. No dates. I don't want to on March such and such. No. None of that. All that is on the paper is the next Bible reference that you start with. I know this sounds very impractical. And I'm sure you probably have lots of other questions. Like, who's going to open the door? The door's going to be locked. I won't be able to get in. Well, we're smart people. We can figure that out. What will become of this? I don't have an answer. I don't even know. I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe the entire Bible gets read. I don't know. In 35 days, maybe we don't get very far at all. I don't know. I don't have the answers. All I can say is I guess we'll find out. I'll leave you with Joshua chapter 8, verse 34, 35. I won't forget about communion this morning, which I typically like to do, forget, but I won't. Joshua read all the words of the law, it says. This is Joshua chapter 8, verse 34 and 35. The blessing, he read all about the blessings and the curses, just as it was written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and the children and the aliens who lived among them. If the ushers could come forward for the sharing of the Lord's table. By the way, that'll start tonight at 7 o'clock. So, just saying. Who will be here? It's a mystery. I don't know.